Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. So as you can see at the beginning of this video, I'm going to start to look at horror icons. I'm going to pick a different horror icon and watch all their movies and review each one. So today I'm beginning with Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th franchise. And obviously I'm beginning with the original Friday the 13th. This came out in 1980, was produced and directed by Sean S. Cunningham, and it starred an early Kevin Bacon and Betsy Palmer. The film opens in 1958 and we see two camp counselors killed by an unseen force, which is shown through a POV. And then the film skips to modern day within the film, 1980. And it looks at Annie, this young backpacker who's trying to make her way to Crystal Lake Camp. She's going to become the cook, and it's really about her trying to get there. She's given a lift by this truck driver, and he explains Crystal Lake and the murders that happen there and the strange things that happen, and they call it Camp Blood. Then we're introduced to the other camp counsellors, including Kevin Bacon's character and a variety of others, and they're all sort of defined enough that we get a sense of who they are as people and what they're doing there. And we're also introduced to the guy running the place, Stephen. He's this sort of, he has curly hair, he has a moustache and glasses, he's kind of a strange looking guy. And it sort of sets up a bit of a red herring that he could be ultimately the killer. And it's really about how strange things start to happen. One by one, these camp counselors are picked off, and until the final battle between the heroine and the ultimate killer. I've always really liked the Friday the 13th series. I think Jason Voorhees is a kind of an interesting character, and as the series went on, it sort of became more of a supernatural thing than it did when it began. And also, I find this film kind of interesting because everyone knows who Jason Voorhees is, especially within the horror community, and how many movies that character spawned and the type of character he is and the backstory that character has. But this film doesn't have him in it at all. This is a prequel to everything. This is before Jason becomes Jason. We don't see him until the second film. The killer in this is Mrs. Voorhees, played brilliantly by Betsy Palmer. We see the killer from a POV point of view, so you're not quite sure who it is. And this was sort of unique and style used at this particular time. This film came after Halloween, which became a huge hit. But this sort of became the archetypal slasher film, with a group of kids together, and one by one they get killed off and they have to work out what's going on. And it sort of has set up this really interesting and unique horror icon with Jason Voorhees. And I found that kind of interesting. Everything sets up with this. Everybody talks about Friday the 13th and who the killer is, and really this film doesn't have that. It's a precursor to everything. And it was never really a thought of having this masked killer as the killer of the film. It was just sort of setting up these teens getting killed by an unseen figure. And then when it's revealed who the figure is, it kind of makes sense with the story, but it's not what you expect. So for people who haven't seen the Friday the 13th film, I'm sorry I've just spoiled things, but for people who haven't seen it, going back to it, it's kind of an interesting thing. Overall, it's a solid film. The acting is pretty solid for the time. It's really well shot. Like I said, they used the choice of a POV for the killer, which is really great throughout the whole film. So it's really the camera focusing on, particular people, and they react to that camera, and I really liked that. I thought that was different and unique. I like the setting, Camp Crystal Lake. I like this sort of a myth and a sort of backstory in regards to Jason Voorhees and what happened to him. And I really like that, and that sort of makes you feel for him a little bit. Well, to tell you the truth, he does appear in it, but as a kid, it's kind of hard to explain if you haven't seen it. He sort of appears at the end, but then it's like, did he or did he not appear? Is it in this girl's head, or did it really happen? That's sort of what it sort of reveals in that particular sequence at the end. I think it's a simple and solid horror film that sort of inspired a lot, and a lot of films came from this, and it spawned ultimately a lot of sequels. There's about 12 of them, I think. And it sort of evolved that character as the films went along. I think what the film does interestingly at the beginning is we're introduced to Annie, and you think she's the main character, the one we're going to follow throughout the film. But it sort of does a psycho thing where we're set up with her, and she's giving information to her to know what's going on. And then ultimately she's killed, and killed early in the piece. And then it sort of shifts to another character who becomes the lead sort of female character in the film. I thought that was an interesting choice and kind of misdirection, and I liked that as well. But I would have liked to have seen Annie more in it, because I thought she was kind of an interesting character to begin with, even though we only know a little bit about her. It sort of explains how the characters disappear in a way, I guess. So the other characters within the film don't sort of start to question, well, where are these people, until like the last part of the film, when the killer sort of reveals herself and the dead bodies start to pile up. It has some interesting horror moments, and there is a bit of jump scares, and the classic, you know, music, which is fantastic, which is really well put together and put in, and adds a lot to the film. And the prosthetic work by Tom Savini, you know, who's become an icon with that sort of stuff in his own right. This was his beginning, and how he made fake necks, and he had a sequence where there was a character gets hit in the head with an axe, and you know, the classic scene with Kevin Bacon's character where he's laying on the bed and a hand grabs his forehead and an arrow comes out through his neck. And there's so many great scenes like that. What I would say is that it is a little dated. You can sort of see where it's sort of fake prosthetic. And it is the 80s, and it was the early beginnings of this sort of prosthetics and visual gags that they use in the film. And on Blu-ray you can really make it out, but it's still very clever, the way they sort of cut the throats, and there's, you know, a variety of things that happen, the axe in the face and that sort of stuff, that's sort of very effective. And even though it is dated and you can see that it isn't quite real, it still works for what they're going for. And I think it's quite inventive and interesting, and it was something that sort of would be used later in not only the Friday the 13th movies, but also in a variety of other horror icon movies, and Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw, a variety of other films like that. This was a film that Sean Cunningham wanted to do because he'd been doing a couple of kids' films that weren't doing really well, and he wanted to do a horror, and all he had to begin with was the title Friday the 13th. That's what he wanted the title to be. He didn't know what the film was going to involve and what the film they were making was going to be, and they didn't even have a script or a story. But that's what he wanted to create. And he did up this sort of poster in the newspaper that it was going to happen, but they didn't have anything else but the poster. And then he sort of had a conversation with Victor Miller, who wrote the film, and they'd never done a horror before. So there's a story, Victor Miller talks about how he went and saw Halloween because that was the movie of the time in regards to horror. And once he saw it once, he could sort of put together the basic outline or the basic premise for that particular film. Like, you have the inciting incident to begin with, that sort of sets things off, then it skips to present day. Then you have a group of randy or horny teens, as he puts it, and they also slowly get killed off one by one until one's left, and that's the one that has to take on the killer themselves, which is usually a strong female character. And he took all that and crafted this sort of script that was really solid, and simple and effective, and it gave each of the characters a bit of depth, that they weren't just run-of-the-mill or cliched in so many ways that they now have become. And you sort of did feel and care for them a little bit. There are some humorous moments in it, and there are some cheesy moments in it because it is the 80s and it is that particular period. But the way it's filmed and captured and put together, it sort of looks really nice for that time period, which a lot of other 80s slasher films didn't look as quite as good as this. And I don't think Cunningham or anyone really knew how successful this film was going to be. It became a huge hit, and it spawned, like I said, many, many sequels. Even up until, the remake recently, which I thought was a solid remake in its own right. There's just something about these sort of horror slasher films that are entertaining and fun, and they're always inventive with the death scenes, and Friday the 13th was definitely one of that sort of franchise, which with each film the death scenes become more interesting and more elaborate, and a lot of things happen with that. I thought was really great, and it sort of gave the Friday the 13th something a little different. Overall, if you haven't seen Friday the 13th, the original film, I highly recommend it. It's really great fun and entertaining. It's a great film to watch with a group of friends where you can sort of make fun of it and get into it, and it's a really good scary movie in the simplicity of what it's trying to say. And I put it up there with the original Halloween, which is one of my favourite horror films of all time. And I kind of look forward to watching the rest of the films in this series as well. Anyway, I hope you're sort of enjoying this video, and if you are, please subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.